The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the scent of old paper and new money. It clung to the mahogany desk, the leather-bound books, and the smug smile on Eleanor's face. She looked every bit the victor, her posture perfect, her expensive silk blouse shimmering under the recessed lighting. She had won. She had taken the estate, the sprawling house with its manicured gardens, the stock portfolio, the art collection, the entire architecture of the life she believed she was owed. For Liam, her husband of 10 years, she had left the scraps. Specifically, one very large, very dilapidated scrap. And finally, Mr. Abernathy, the family lawyer, cleared his throat, peering over his spectacles. To Mr. Liam Sterling, as per the amended marital asset agreement, is allocated the property listed as the North Pasture Barn and its immediate 5 acres. Eleanor let out a small, almost imperceptible scoff. It was a sound Liam had become intimately familiar with, a delicate puff of air that carried the weight of 1,000 insults. The North Pasture Barn was a ruin. For decades it had been a leaning, splintered testament to gravity's inevitable victory. The town council had twice issued notices, flagging it as a potential collapse hazard. The family had taken to calling it Liam's Cathedral, a sarcastic nod to his quiet, contemplative nature and the structure's utter lack of monetary or practical value. Eleanor thought she was leaving him with a burden, a final, public humiliation that would cost him thousands to demolish. She thought it was a masterstroke of poetic justice. She didn't know that the rotting timbers held a secret worth millions. She didn't know that for the past 2 years, Liam had been meeting quietly with the property's original owner, old Mr. Davies, not out of pity, but out of a shared passion. She didn't know about the leather-bound journal Davies had given him, filled with sketches, structural notes, and a forgotten history. Within 3 months, the condemned barn she'd used as a final insult would become the cornerstone of her undoing. We all have moments in our lives when we feel underestimated, moments when someone tries to define our worth for us. This is a story about what happens when they get it profoundly wrong. I'm glad you're here to watch it unfold. If you enjoy stories about quiet strength and seeing arrogance meet its match, I'd be honored if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to that barn. Liam drove his modest sedan down the long gravel driveway that split the estate. To the left, the grand house rose up, a monument of white columns and sprawling wings, where Eleanor was likely already directing staff, rearranging furniture, cementing her dominion. To the right, past a rolling field of overgrown grass, stood the barn. It slumped against the bruised purple of the evening sky like a weary old man. He parked the car but didn't get out immediately. He just looked at it. From this distance, he could see why everyone considered it a teardown. The roof lines sagged deeply in the middle. Entire sections of the wall siding had peeled away, and one of the great sliding doors hung from a single, rusted hinge. It looked sad. It looked defeated. But Liam saw something else. He saw the bones. He had spent his career as an architect, not the flashy, magazine cover type Eleanor had always wished he would be, but a different kind. He specialized in historical restoration, in finding the soul of a building beneath the decay. He didn't build monuments to ego. He gave forgotten structures a second voice. It was a quiet, methodical profession, one that paid well but offered little in the way of cocktail party bragging rights. To Eleanor and her family, his work was baffling, a glorified trade. They saw him as a man who played with old buildings, not a man who commanded 7-figure budgets to resurrect them. His humility was, to them, a lack of ambition. Finally, he opened the car door. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain. He walked the 100 yards to the barn, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The closer he got, the more the scale of the structure became apparent. It was enormous, far larger than a typical agricultural barn. The main doors were easily 20 feet high. He didn't try the broken door. He walked around to the smaller side entrance, the one Mr. Davies had always used. The wood was swollen, but he put his shoulder into it, and it groaned open with the sound of deep reluctance. He stepped inside. The interior was a cathedral of dust and light. Golden hour sun streamed through the gaps in the walls, illuminating swirling motes of dust like tiny, drifting stars. The air was thick with the smell of old hay, dry rot, and time itself. Great hand-hewn beams, some as thick as a man's torso, crisscrossed the vast space above him, disappearing into the shadows of the vaulted roof. It was here, in the construction of this frame, that the secret lay. Liam walked to the center of the vast, packed earth floor and looked up. He wasn't just seeing wood. He was seeing a Callaway stress frame. It was an incredibly rare, experimental construction technique from the late 18th century, used by a visionary but short-lived shipwright-turned-architect named Silas Callaway. The interlocking joinery, the unique truss design, it was all there, just as Mr. Davies's journal had described. Callaway had only built a handful of these structures before he was lost at sea. Most were thought to be gone, victims of fire or progress. Only 2 were known to have survived. This would be the third. To an untrained eye, it was just a rotting barn. To a historian or a structural architect, it was the equivalent of finding a lost Da Vinci in an attic. He heard his phone buzz in his pocket. He knew who it was before he even looked. He let it buzz a second time, then answered. "Hello, Eleanor. I just wanted to call and see how you were settling into your new residence," she said. Her voice was laced with that saccharine venom she deployed so skillfully. "Don't let a wall fall on you. The paperwork for that would be such a headache." Liam's eyes traced the elegant, impossible curve of a massive oak brace high above. "It's fine, Eleanor. It's got good bones." Her laughter was sharp and brittle. "Good bones? Liam, it's a pile of splinters. Honestly, I don't know what you're going to do with it, but I guess that's your problem now. I've already got a demolition company's number for you, if you want it. A little parting gift." "That's very thoughtful of you," he said, his voice perfectly even. He walked over to a section of the wall where the siding was gone, revealing the intricate mortise and tenon joinery of the frame beneath. He ran his hand over the wood. It was hard as iron. "But I think I'll hold off on that for now. Suit yourself. Play with your broken toys. I have to go. Marcus is here, and we're celebrating." The click was abrupt. Marcus was her brother, a real estate developer who shared his sister's belief that the world was a hierarchy and they were perched comfortably at its apex. Celebrating. Liam looked around the cavernous space. The last rays of sunlight painted stripes across the floor. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time that day. He was celebrating too. He just hadn't told anyone yet. He pulled a small, powerful flashlight from his jacket pocket and began his work. He moved methodically, starting in one corner and working his way around the perimeter, inspecting every joint, every post, every beam. He was no longer just a husband being cast aside. He was an architect greeting a masterpiece. He took out his phone, not to make a call, but to take pictures. He documented everything: the sweep of the trusses, the unique wooden pegs used instead of nails, the maker's mark, a stylized SC, faintly visible on the base of a central king post. Hours passed. The sun disappeared completely, and the barn was plunged into a profound darkness, broken only by the beam of his light. He felt a deep sense of peace here, a connection to the craftsman who had shaped these timbers 200 years ago. This wasn't a place of failure, it was a place of potential. He thought of his last conversation with Mr. Davies, just a week before he passed. The old man had been frail, his voice a reedy whisper, but his eyes were bright. "They see a ruin, Liam," he had said, his hand trembling as he tapped a page in the journal. "They don't know what it is. You do. Don't let them tear it down. Don't let them erase it. It's not just a barn, it's a piece of history. It's, it's a work of art. I won't, Liam had promised. Now, standing in the silent dark, the weight of that promise settled on him, not as a burden, but as a purpose. Eleanor had left him this barn as an act of scorn. She had no idea she had actually given him a gift, the chance to fulfill a promise, to practice his art on the grandest scale, and in the process, to reclaim a narrative she had tried so desperately to write for him. He pulled the worn leather journal from his inner jacket pocket. It was the symbolic object, the key to everything. He opened it, its pages filled with elegant script and detailed drawings. This was his inheritance, the real one. The barn wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. By day, Liam worked from a small, rented office in town, managing his existing restoration projects and coordinating with his team. He was a man of considerable, if quiet, means, a fact Eleanor had always conveniently overlooked. His firm, Bedrock Restorations, was one of the most respected in the niche field of historical architecture. He didn't need her money. He never had. He had stayed in the marriage for reasons that now felt foolish and distant. A misguided sense of loyalty, a hope that the woman he'd once loved was still in there somewhere. By night, he was at the barn. He brought in temporary work lights, powered by a quiet generator. He cataloged, he measured, he drew. He took core samples of the wood, sending them to a lab for dendrochronological dating to confirm their age. He spent hours on his laptop, cross-referencing the barn's structure with the few surviving schematics of Silas Calloway's work. It was a perfect match. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, he received an invitation. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind of thing Eleanor favored. It was a summons, disguised as a family dinner. To celebrate new beginnings, the invitation read. Liam knew it was a command performance. He was expected to appear, to play the part of the gracious loser, to endure their pity and their poorly veiled contempt. His first instinct was to throw it away, but then he considered the strategic value. It was an opportunity to gather information, to observe his antagonists in their natural habitat. He arrived at the estate precisely at 7. The house was blazing with light. A valet he didn't recognize took his keys. As he walked up the stone steps, he could hear the murmur of conversation and the clink of glasses from the back patio. Eleanor greeted him at the door. She wore a white dress that was both elegant and severe. "Liam, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I wasn't sure you would." "You invited me," he replied simply. "Yes, well, I wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings." It was a statement, not a question. She led him through the house. It was already different. His favorite armchair was gone, replaced by a severe-looking modern piece. The landscape paintings he'd collected had been swapped for abstract canvases of questionable merit. It was being scrubbed clean of him. On the patio, Marcus was holding court by the outdoor fireplace. He was a softer, less defined version of his sister, with a politician's easy smile and a banker's predatory eyes. He raised his glass to Liam. "The man of the hour," Marcus boomed, a little too loudly. "Liam, my friend, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Marcus, thank you for asking." "Good, good. Tough break, all this. But you're a survivor." He clapped Liam on the shoulder. "Eleanor tells me you've been spending a lot of time out at that old wreck. Getting sentimental?" "Something like that," Liam said, accepting a glass of water from a passing waiter. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. It was held at the enormous dining table, the one Eleanor's great-grandfather had imported from Italy. Liam was seated at the far end, geographically and socially isolated. The conversation, steered by Eleanor and Marcus, revolved entirely around things designed to highlight Liam's perceived failures. They talked about a recent acquisition Marcus's firm had made, a multi-million-dollar commercial property. They discussed a friend's promotion to CEO. They dissected the soaring value of the local real estate market. "It's all about vision, you see," Marcus said, gesturing with his fork. "You have to be able to look at a piece of land, an asset, and see not what it is, but what it could be, what its maximum value is. Most people don't have that. They see a rundown warehouse. I see luxury lofts. They see an empty lot. I see a 30-story high-rise." He glanced down the table at Liam. "It's a killer instinct, I suppose." The implication was clear. Liam, with his quiet focus on old broken things, lacked this vision. He was a preservationist, not a creator of value. Eleanor chimed in. "Liam was never interested in the financial side of things. He's more of an artist." She said the word artist as if it were a synonym for child. "He gets attached to things, don't you, darling?" The old pet name was a deliberate twist of the knife. Liam took a slow sip of water. He met her gaze from across the vast expanse of polished wood. "I do," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the chatter. "I believe some things have a value that can't be measured in dollars per square foot. Things like history, craftsmanship, integrity." A brief, uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Marcus recovered first. "Well, that's a very noble thought, Liam. But nobility doesn't pay the bills, does it? At the end of the day, a building is either an asset or a liability. That barn of yours? It's a liability. A big, ugly, rotting liability on what is otherwise a prime piece of development land." "The adjacent 5 acres, you mean?" Liam asked, a flicker of something in his eyes. "Exactly," Marcus exclaimed, leaning forward. "That whole parcel is zoned for residential development. You could subdivide it, put up a couple of spec homes, or better yet," he lowered his voice conspiratorially, "you could sell it. To me, I'll give you a fair price for the land, well above market. I'll even absorb the cost of demolishing that monstrosity. It's a win-win. You walk away with a nice chunk of cash, and I get to clean up the view from the main house." This was it, the play. This was the real reason for the dinner. It wasn't about closure or new beginnings. It was an acquisition attempt, cloaked in family obligation. Liam looked from Marcus's eager face to Eleanor's expectant one. She was in on it, of course. She wanted the barn gone, not just because it was an eyesore, but because it was his. Its presence was a small, lingering stain on her perfect new world. He let the silence stretch, enjoying the subtle shift in their posture as they awaited his answer. He placed his napkin on the table. "Thank you for the offer, Marcus," he said, his voice measured and final. "But it's not for sale." Marcus's smile tightened. "Don't be sentimental, Liam. It's a business decision. I'm offering you a lifeline." "I don't need a lifeline," Liam said, standing up. "And it's not sentimentality. It's an investment." Eleanor let out another one of her signature scoffs. "An investment? Liam, what could you possibly invest in a condemned barn except a match and a can of gasoline?" Liam looked at her, a deep, profound sadness welling up within him. Not for himself, but for her utter blindness. "You see a liability, Eleanor. That's all you've ever been able to see." He turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He didn't need to hear their whispers, their diagnoses of his foolishness and pride. He had all the information he needed. They didn't just want the barn gone, they wanted the land. And they had just revealed how much they were willing to pay for it. The game had changed. The next morning, a large, professionally printed "For Sale" sign appeared at the edge of the estate, right where the main road met the long gravel drive. It was from Marcus's development company. It didn't advertise the barn, of course. It advertised a vision. Coming soon, the residences at Northwood Manor, exclusive luxury homes. The sign featured a glossy rendering of 3 enormous, soulless McMansions, sitting exactly where the barn and its 5 acres were located. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a public declaration of intent. Marcus hadn't even bothered to call Liam. He was simply proceeding as if the deal were already done, as if Liam's refusal was a temporary negotiating tactic that could be steamrolled by sheer force of will. Liam saw the sign on his way to the barn. He pulled over and got out of his car, staring at the artist's rendering. The fictional houses were bland and oversized, pale imitations of the main estate house. In the drawing, the historic landscape was flattened, sterilized. The ancient oaks that bordered the property were gone, replaced by generic ornamental saplings. It was a vision of profit, devoid of soul. It was everything he stood against in his work and in his life. He didn't get angry. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. What he felt was cold, clear, and sharp. It was the feeling of a chess player seeing his opponent's fatal blunder. They had overplayed their hand. They had made their intentions public. Now he could make his public too. Back in his small office, he made a phone call he had been preparing to make for a week. "Isabel Vance, please." A moment later, a crisp, energetic voice came on the line. "This is Isabel." "Miss Vance, my name is Liam Sterling. I'm an architect. I was given your name by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They said if anyone in the state understood 18th century structural engineering, it was you." There was a pause. "The National Trust is very kind," she said, her voice warming with interest. "What is it you're working on, Mr. Sterling?" "I'm working on a barn," Liam said. "A very specific, very rare barn. I believe I have found a Callaway stress frame." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was faint static. When Isabel Vance finally spoke, her voice was stripped of its casual energy. It was focused, intense, and dripping with academic excitement. "Mr. Sterling," she said slowly, "are you certain? I've cross-referenced it with the Concord blueprints and the notes from the Maritime Museum. I've had the timber dated. It's a perfect match." "Where is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's in Northwood, on the old Davies property." Another pause. "The Davies estate? I thought that was all being developed." "I saw a sign." "The sign is premature," Liam said. "The barn and the 5 acres it sits on are my property, and I have no intention of demolishing it. I intend to restore it." "Restore it? Mr. Sterling, if it is what you say it is, it needs to be preserved, documented, declared a historic landmark. This is monumental." "I agree," Liam said, "which is why I'm calling you. Eleanor and Marcus Thorne, the owners of the main estate, are moving to have the entire parcel rezoned for high-density residential use. There's a town planning and zoning meeting in 2 weeks. They see the barn as an obstacle to be removed." "They can't," Isabel said, her voice hardening. "They can't be allowed to. This is a piece of American architectural history." "I know," Liam said calmly, "which is why I need you there. I'm going to make a counter-proposal at that meeting, not just to save the barn, but to give it a new purpose. I have the plans, the budget, the historical documentation, but I need your voice. I need your authority." "Mr. Sterling," Isabel Vance said, and Liam could almost hear her smiling. "You will have it. I wouldn't miss this for the world." For the next 2 weeks, the quiet before the storm settled. Liam worked with a furious, focused energy. He finalized his architectural plans, a breathtaking design that would preserve the entire Callaway frame, encasing the original structure within a modern glass and steel shell. The interior would be transformed into a public space, a museum dedicated to regional craftsmanship, a library of architectural history, and a workshop for teaching traditional building techniques. It was ambitious, it was expensive, and it was brilliant. He named it the Davies Callaway Center for Historic Craft. He compiled his presentation, a meticulously organized binder containing the barn's full history, the dendrochronology report, copies of Mr. Davies's journal pages, structural analyses, and letters of support he had solicited from architectural historians across the country, and of course the stunning, full-color renderings of his proposed restoration. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Marcus moved with the confidence of royalty. They hosted cocktail parties for the members of the town council. They spoke of revitalizing the area, of increasing the tax base. They framed their project as a gift to the town. The demolition of the unsafe barn was presented as a public service. In their minds, the outcome of the meeting was a foregone conclusion. Liam was a non-entity. His refusal to sell a minor, sentimental irritant that would be swept aside by the wheels of progress and influence. They never once thought to ask him what his investment was. They were so blinded by their own brilliance, they couldn't imagine he had a plan of his own. They were walking, step by confident step, into a trap of their own making. Liam, in his quiet way, was simply holding the door open for them. The night of the town hall meeting was humid and tense. The main assembly room was packed, a stuffy space with worn wooden pews and fluorescent lights that hummed with an anxious energy. Most of the attendees were residents from the affluent Northwood area, drawn by the prospect of the new luxury development. Eleanor and Marcus were already there, working the room like seasoned politicians. Eleanor, in a sharp navy blue suit, smiled graciously, while Marcus clapped council members on the back, his voice a confident baritone that filled the space. They were seated in the front row, a portfolio of their plans resting on the bench beside them. They radiated power. Liam arrived 5 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. He wore a simple, well-tailored gray suit. He carried a single, thick leather binder. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply found a seat in the third row, directly behind Eleanor and Marcus, and sat down. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, saw him, and gave a tight, dismissive nod before turning back to her conversation with the council president. She saw his presence not as a threat, but as the sad, final act of a defeated man coming to watch his own irrelevance be codified into law. A few moments later, a woman with a sharp bob of gray hair and an intensely intelligent face entered the room. She carried a briefcase and scanned the crowd with purpose. Her eyes met Liam's, and she gave a subtle, affirming nod. Isabel Vance took a seat on the aisle, 2 rows behind Liam. The players were all in position. The meeting began with a tedious procession of local issues, a dispute over a stop sign, a debate about recycling bin sizes. Liam sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the binder in his lap. He could feel the smug certainty radiating from the front row. He could almost hear Eleanor's thoughts. Let him watch. Let him see how the real world works. Finally, the council president, a man named Henderson, whom Marcus had been schmoozing earlier, announced the agenda item. Next up, we have the zoning variance application for the Northwood Manor property, filed by Thorne Development. Mr. Thorne? Marcus stood and approached the podium with an easy confidence. He opened his portfolio, displaying the glossy rendering of the McMansions. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council, he began, his voice smooth and persuasive. What we are proposing is not just a development, but a beautification, an enhancement. The Thorne family has been a part of this community for generations, and we want to see it prosper. This project, the residences at Northwood Manor, will bring in significant tax revenue, create jobs, and offer 3 beautiful family homes that are in keeping with the aesthetic of the neighborhood. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the barn's location on a map. The only thing standing in the way is a dilapidated, unsafe structure that has been a blight on the landscape for years. It is a liability, plain and simple. We plan to have it professionally and safely demolished at our own expense, clearing the way for progress. This is a simple, common-sense proposal that benefits everyone. He smiled, wrapping up his presentation. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Councilman Henderson beamed. Thank you, Marcus. A very clear and compelling presentation. He scanned the room. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in opposition to this proposal? For a moment, there was silence. Eleanor's shoulders relaxed. It was going just as planned. Then, a calm voice from the third row said, I do. Every head turned. Liam stood up. He walked to the podium, placing his leather binder on its surface with a soft, definitive thud. He looked not at the council, but directly at Marcus and Eleanor. "My name is Liam Sterling," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "I am the legal owner of the barn and the 5 acres of land in question. And Mr. Thorne is mistaken. It is not a simple proposal, and the barn is not a liability. It is in fact the single most valuable asset on the entire Northwood Manor property." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's face, which had been a mask of serene victory, flickered with annoyance. Marcus's smile froze on his face. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson said, sounding irritated, "the structure has been twice cited as a public nuisance. What value could it possibly have?" Liam opened his binder. "The value of history," he began, his voice gaining strength. "The value of art. And a monetary value that Mr. Thorne, for all his talk of vision, has completely failed to see." He turned a page revealing a large, clear photograph of the barn's interior frame. "What you are looking at is not a pile of rotting wood. It is a Callaway stress frame, one of only 3 known to exist in the world. It is a masterpiece of 18th century engineering, a revolutionary design by the architect Silas Callaway." He continued, his words precise and irrefutable. He presented the timber dating report. He showed copies of Callaway's original blueprints, pointing out the identical joinery. He read a passage from Mr. Davies's journal describing the barn's construction. With every sentence, the mood in the room shifted. The bored indifference of the attendees turned to fascination. The council members, who had been ready to rubber stamp the proposal, were now leaning forward, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. Eleanor stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. This was not the quiet, defeated man she knew. This was a stranger, a man speaking with an authority she had never witnessed. Liam then turned to the financial argument. "Marcus is a developer. He speaks of value. So let's speak of value. The last Callaway structure to be sold, the Concord Granary, was acquired by a museum consortium 10 years ago for $3.8 million. And it was in far worse condition than this one. An independent appraisal, conducted last week by Sotheby's Historical Properties Division, has placed the preliminary value of this structure, as is, at $5.1 million. A collective gasp went through the room. 5.1 million. The number hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Marcus's face had gone pale. Eleanor looked as if she'd been struck. The worthless scrap she had thrown to her husband, the symbol of his humiliation, was worth more than half the liquid value of the estate she had fought so hard to secure. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. "My ex-wife and her brother," Liam continued, his gaze locking with theirs, "offered to buy this liability from me. They saw 5 acres of land. They completely missed the $5.1 million work of art sitting on it. So much for vision." The burn of the insult was quiet, clinical, and devastating. It was a direct echo of Marcus's own words, turned back on him like a perfectly executed parry. Then Liam delivered the final blow. He turned to the last section of his binder, revealing the architectural renderings of his proposed restoration. "But I have no intention of selling it," he declared. "I am an architect specializing in historical restoration. My firm has already secured the funding, not to demolish this treasure, but to celebrate it. We will restore the frame and build the Davies Callaway Center for Historic Craft, a public museum, a library, and a teaching workshop. It will be a gift to this community, a landmark that will draw visitors and scholars from around the world. It will generate sustainable revenue, and unlike a few luxury homes, it will enrich the soul of this town for generations to come." He looked at the council. "All I require from you is the approval to redesignate this parcel from residential to cultural and educational use, and the official landmark designation to protect it forever." He closed the binder. "Thank you." The room was utterly silent. The council members looked stunned. The residents looked enthralled. Marcus stood frozen by his chair, his glossy presentation now looking cheap and foolish. Eleanor's face was a crumbling mask of disbelief and rage. This is absurd, she finally sputtered, rising to her feet. He's making this up. It's just an old barn. On the contrary, a crisp voice cut through the room from the aisle. Isabel Vance stood up. Everything Mr. Sterling has said is, to my knowledge, absolutely correct. She walked to the podium as Liam stepped aside. My name is Dr. Isabel Vance. I am the lead curator for the American Architectural History Institute and the foremost expert on Silas Calloway. I came here tonight at Mr. Sterling's request. I have personally inspected the structure, and I can confirm, unequivocally, that it is an authentic Calloway frame. Its historical and cultural value is, frankly, incalculable. To demolish it would be an act of staggering, unforgivable cultural vandalism. Mr. Sterling's plan, however, is visionary. It is exactly the kind of thoughtful, respectful preservation that a treasure like this deserves. My institute offers its full and unconditional support for his project. She looked directly at Councilman Henderson. The world will be watching what you do here tonight. The finality in her voice was absolute. It was checkmate. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had undergone a seismic reversal. Eleanor and Marcus, who had walked in as the confident masters of the universe, were now exposed as greedy, blind, and foolish. Liam, the quiet man they had dismissed and humiliated, now stood as a visionary, a protector of history, backed by an unassailable authority. Eleanor sank back into her seat, her face ashen. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly shock of public humiliation. She had tried to leave him with a pile of worthless splinters. Instead, she had handed him a crown, and he had just placed it on his own head, in front of everyone. The immediate aftermath was a blur of motion and sound that seemed to happen in slow motion for Eleanor and Marcus. Councilman Henderson, his face now a mask of political panic, began stammering. Well, this is certainly new information. Dr. Vance, Mr. Sterling, your presentations are compelling, very compelling. The council voted unanimously to table Thorne Development's proposal indefinitely. They then voted unanimously to fast-track the historical landmark designation for the Calloway Barn, effectively shielding it from any future demolition attempts. It was a complete and total rout. As the meeting adjourned, a crowd immediately formed around Liam and Dr. Vance. Local reporters, who had shown up expecting a boring zoning debate, were now peppering them with questions. Residents came up to shake Liam's hand, their eyes alight with excitement about the new museum. He answered each question with the same calm, measured grace he had displayed all evening. Eleanor and Marcus remained in the front row, marooned in a sea of their own failure. People who had been greeting them warmly an hour ago now pointedly avoided their gaze. The air around them grew cold with the sudden chill of social irrelevance. We have to do something, Marcus hissed, his voice tight with panic. He was shuffling his useless presentation papers into his briefcase. We can sue. We can file an injunction. He can't do this. Eleanor wasn't listening. She was staring at Liam, who was now being interviewed by a local TV crew, the lights making him look taller, more substantial. He hadn't gloated. He hadn't even raised his voice. He had simply presented the truth, and in doing so, he had dismantled her entire world. The humiliation was so profound, it felt like a physical illness. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the narrative. She was the smart one, the successful one, the one who saw value. He was the quiet, ineffectual dreamer. In one evening, he had completely inverted that reality in the most public way imaginable. Eleanor, did you hear me? Marcus snapped. Shut up, Marcus, she said, her voice a low, dangerous tremor. You and your vision. You look like a fool. I look like a fool? You're the one who gave him the barn. You handed him a $5 million lottery ticket and laughed while you did it. Their whispered argument was vicious, the desperate finger-pointing of two people in a sinking boat. Finally, Eleanor stood, her face a hard, pale mask. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the curious and pitying glances, and walked straight out of the building into the humid night air. She didn't wait for the valet. She just started walking, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement, a woman fleeing the scene of her own immolation. The next day, the story was everywhere. Condemned barn revealed as $5.1 million architectural treasure. Local architect unveils plan for world-class museum. Liam's name was mentioned with reverence. The Thorn name, once a symbol of local power and influence, was now attached to words like foiled, blindsided, and embarrassing miscalculation. The financial consequences began almost immediately. Marcus received a call from the primary investor in the residences at Northwood Manor. The investor was pulling out. Without the 5 acres of the barn property, the project was no longer viable, and the public relations disaster had made the Thorn name toxic. "You told me the land was a sure thing, Marcus," the investor yelled over the phone. "You made us look like idiots." Eleanor's problems were more social, but no less devastating. A charity board she chaired politely requested her resignation, citing the unfortunate publicity. Invitations to long-standing social events suddenly stopped arriving. She was experiencing the one thing she feared most, a fall from grace. Her status, which she had so carefully curated, was built on a foundation of perceived success and influence. Now that the perception was shattered, the entire structure was collapsing. A week after the meeting, Liam was at the barn, supervising a team of structural engineers who were conducting a more detailed analysis. His phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Liam, it's Marcus." His voice was stripped of its usual bravado. It sounded thin and tired. "Can we talk?" "We are talking," Liam said, his tone neutral. "No, I mean, in person. Can I come by the barn?" Liam considered it. He had no desire to see Marcus, but he sensed something different in his tone. Not a threat, but a plea. "Fine, I'm here now." 20 minutes later, Marcus's luxury SUV pulled up. He got out looking diminished. His expensive suit was rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He walked over to Liam, avoiding his gaze, and looked up at the towering structure. "So this is it," Marcus said quietly. "The $5 million barn." "It is." Marcus kicked at a loose stone on the ground. "I've lost everything, you know. My investors are gone. My credit line has been frozen. The whole Northwood project is dead." He finally looked at Liam. "You destroyed me." Liam met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't destroy you, Marcus. You and Eleanor did this to yourselves. You were so convinced of your own superiority that you never once stopped to consider that you might be wrong. You saw a pile of wood you could demolish for a profit. You never bothered to actually look at it." This was the moral mirror. Liam wasn't accusing, he was reflecting. He was holding up a clear, unsparing image of Marcus's own actions. Marcus flinched, but he didn't argue. The fight was gone out of him. "What she did, what we did, at the dinner trying to pressure you, it was wrong." It was the closest he could get to an apology. "Eleanor she's not handling this well. She's blaming everyone but herself. She wants me to find a way to sue you, to invalidate the landmark status, to declare you mentally incompetent for not selling. Anything." "And will you?" Liam asked. Marcus shook his head, a slow, weary gesture. "No, it's over. I know that. But she doesn't. She'll ruin herself completely trying to fight this. She'll drain her accounts on lawyers. She'll alienate everyone she has left." He took a deep breath. "I came here to ask you, what do you want?" "What do I want?" Liam was taken aback. "From her, from me. Is there a number, a settlement, something that will make you walk away from this museum project and just sell the barn to a neutral third party? Let us save face? Liam stared at him, a wave of disappointment washing over him. Even now, after all this, they still thought it was about money. They still thought his principles were for sale. You still don't get it, do you? Liam said, his voice laced with a sadness that was more damning than any anger. This was never about money. This is about a promise I made to an old man. It's about preserving something beautiful that you were ready to turn into dust for a quick profit. He turned and gestured toward the magnificent structure. I don't want anything from you, Marcus. There is no number. I'm going to build this center, and you and Eleanor are going to have to live with the knowledge that you tried to destroy it. That's the only consequence that matters. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the truth of Liam's words finally sinking in. He had come seeking a transaction, a way to buy his way out of the mess he'd created. He was leaving with a moral judgment, one that offered no appeal and no escape. He nodded slowly, turned without another word, got into his car, and drove away, leaving Liam alone with his masterpiece and the quiet hum of his own integrity. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. Autumn's crisp air gave way to the quiet blanket of winter. The "For Sale" sign at the edge of the property had long since vanished, an embarrassing relic of a failed campaign. In its place, a new sign had been erected. It was simple, elegant, and made of carved oak. It read, "Future home of the Davies Callaway Center for Historic Craft. Opening Fall 2025. The barn itself was a hive of meticulous activity. It was now shrouded in a complex web of scaffolding. Under Liam's direct supervision, a team of the country's best timber framers and restoration artisans were painstakingly cleaning, stabilizing, and treating the ancient Callaway frame. The process was slow, deliberate, and reverent. It was less a construction site and more an archaeological preservation. Liam had poured himself into the project. It was the culmination of his life's work, a perfect synthesis of his skills as an architect and his deep respect for history. He was on site every day, his quiet authority guiding every decision. The man Eleanor had called a dreamer was now managing a multi-million-dollar project with a crew of 50, coordinating with historians, museum curators, and town officials. He had never been more alive. One cold afternoon in late January, as a light snow was beginning to fall, a familiar car pulled up the drive. It was Eleanor. She got out of the car, pulling her expensive wool coat tightly around her. She looked thinner, her face etched with a tension that hadn't been there before. She stood for a moment, watching the flurry of activity, before walking toward Liam, who was conferring with his site foreman. He saw her coming and excused himself. He met her halfway, the pristine white snow crunching under their feet. "Eleanor," he said. It wasn't a question. "Liam," her voice was brittle. "It's bigger than I imagined." "The project or the barn?" "Both," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the intricate skeleton of the frame visible through the scaffolding. "I got another letter from my lawyer today. He says my last appeal to contest the landmark status was rejected. He says I have no more options." "He's a good lawyer," Liam said. "He's giving you sound advice." She finally looked at him, her eyes searching his face for some sign of triumph, of gloating. She found none. There was only a calm, quiet resolve. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "To see me ruined? To have everyone in town whispering about me, pitying me?" "No, Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I never wanted that. All I ever wanted was for you to see my work, my passion, as something valuable, not as a hobby or a failure to live up to your expectations." He gestured around them. "This isn't about ruining you. This is about building something." She was silent for a long time, watching the snowflakes melt on the dark wood of her coat. "Marcus left," she said suddenly. "Left? He's moved to the city, took a junior position with another firm. He sold his shares in the family company to me for practically nothing. He said he wanted a clean break, a chance to build something on his own, something honest. She said the word honest with a mix of confusion and contempt. He told me he came to see you. He said you were right. Liam nodded slowly. It seemed Marcus had made his choice. He had chosen integrity, however late, over his sister's destructive pride. He said I should apologize to you, Eleanor continued, her voice barely a whisper. He said it was the only way to move forward. Liam waited. The snow fell around them, muffling the world in a soft, white silence. This was the moment, the chance for a real apology, for a sliver of redemption. But it didn't come. I just can't believe you kept this from me, she said, the familiar edge of accusation creeping back into her voice. All those years, you let me think you were less. You let me believe the barn was worthless. It was a lie, Liam, a lie of omission. And there it was. In her mind, the fault was still his. He had deceived her by not revealing his secret knowledge, by allowing her to underestimate him. The idea that her blindness was her own responsibility was a concept she still couldn't grasp. Liam felt a profound and final wave of release. The last lingering thread of hope for the woman he had once loved finally snapped. No, Eleanor, he said, his voice filled with a sad finality. I never lied to you. I just lived my life. You were the one who wrote a story about who I was. You were so convinced that story was true, you never bothered to read the actual book. He looked back toward the barn, now glowing under the work lights as the sky darkened. I have to get back to work. I wish you well, Eleanor. I hope you find what you're looking for. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the falling snow. He didn't look back. He knew there was nothing there for him to see. She had been given a choice between humility and pride, and she had chosen pride. Her prison was one of her own making, and he no longer held the key. He had his own cathedral to build. 2 years later, the Davies Callaway Center for Historic Craft opened to the public. It was a triumph. Liam's design was hailed by critics as a masterpiece of modern restoration, a perfect dialogue between the past and the present. The ancient, honey-colored Callaway frame stood pristine and powerful inside its climate-controlled glass enclosure, a breathtaking centerpiece. The galleries were filled with exhibits on local history, the library was stocked with rare architectural texts, and the workshop was already booked solid with classes for aspiring woodworkers and artisans. It became the heart of the community, a place of beauty and learning that Liam had promised. It drew tourists and scholars, breathing new economic and cultural life into the town. Liam, as its founder and director, was no longer the quiet, overlooked architect. He was a respected community leader, a man who had turned a personal insult into a public gift. He rarely thought of Eleanor. He had heard she'd sold the grand estate house, its upkeep too costly without the full Thorne family fortune to support it, and moved into a smaller, more anonymous condominium in the city. Her fall from grace was complete, but it had happened not with a bang, but with a quiet, lonely fade into obscurity. Marcus, he had heard, was doing well. He was working his way up in his new firm, known for his meticulous, honest work. He and Liam had exchanged a brief, cordial email once. There was no deep friendship, but there was a mutual, unspoken respect. Marcus had faced his failure and chosen to learn from it. One evening, Liam stood alone in the main hall of the center after closing. The lights were low, casting long shadows from the magnificent 18th century beams. He ran his hand over a central post, feeling the smooth, hard grain of the ancient wood. He thought about the nature of value. Eleanor and Marcus had seen value only in what could be bought, sold, or demolished for profit. They had looked at this magnificent structure and seen only a liability. They failed to understand that true worth isn't always visible on the surface. It's often hidden in the history, in the craftsmanship, in the integrity of the bones. It requires a willingness to see beyond the superficial, to look for the soul of a thing. This barn, once a symbol of his humiliation, had become a testament to his deepest beliefs. It had vindicated not only his professional skill, but his entire philosophy of life, that patience triumphs over aggression, that quiet strength is more powerful than loud dominance, and that respect is something you build, not something you demand. He hadn't sought revenge, he had sought restoration, both for the barn and for himself. And in the end, he had achieved both. The barn stood, more beautiful and celebrated than ever, and he stood with it, a man who had quietly, patiently, and definitively reclaimed his own story. The journey we've been on today is about more than just a barn. It's about the quiet strength it takes to know your own value when others refuse to see it. It's a reminder that the most powerful victories aren't loud and aggressive, but are often won through patience, integrity, and a deep belief in something bigger than oneself. What did you think of Liam's approach? Do you believe he handled the situation with Eleanor and Marcus in the right way? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspectives truly enrich this community. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel for more stories of vindication, justice, and the quiet triumph of the human spirit. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to sharing another story with you soon.